Good evening and welcome to this evening's Beyond Bow. Tonight we'll be talking fall fungi and berries with Mitchell County's own Chelsea. We are so excited to have you here on our webinar, and I am Rachel Alice with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. Before we get going in tonight's webinar, just wanted to talk a little bit about the Becoming an Outdoor Woman program here in Iowa. This is traditionally a 3-day workshop weekend held in the spring. This year it will be at Wesley Woods, May 20th through 22nd of 2022. Over the course of the weekend, ladies have the chance to take 4 different sessions learning on different facets of being outdoors, whether it's outdoor cooking, whether it's firearms, pistol rifle shooting, learning about archery. Maybe you want to really learn a little bit more about game care. All of these are different sessions that are offered, and we try and change them up a little bit each year. So check www.iowadnr.gov/bow for any updates and classes. We look to get that registration open in early January, so we will be shooting for mid-January registration opening. Again, that's www.iowadnr.gov/bow. In addition to that 3-day weekend, we also offer different Beyond Bow workshops. So these include webinars like tonight's program. We also do in-person events, whether they be a weekend event such as Water, Women, and Wine, where you spend the weekend paddling in Shelby County on the Nishnabotna River, or we do other things like Day at the Range. We've also done outdoor cooking webinars over Zoom, where we send out ingredient lists and then you cook along with us, whether it's using sandwich makers, just open fire, or even Dutch oven cooking. So just different ways to kind of connect and learn skills and resources connecting you to the outdoors. So before we get started with Chelsea, I just want to remind anyone that hasn't been on a webinar with us before, we try and make this as interactive as possible. So please utilize the chat feature if you just want to give us some feedback, or if you have any questions and answers if you have any questions that you'd like asked live for Chelsea, please drop them in that Q&A, and that way we can get to them and Chelsea can get them answered for you. We'll be behind the scenes here, so if there's anything we can do to make your evening any more enjoyable, please let us know. I will be sending out an email with this recording, as well as links to different books or resources that Chelsea talks about. So feel free to follow along with any of the links. I will be dropping them in the chat, so you're more than welcome to follow along there. Otherwise, check that email and you'll have those resources at your disposal. So without further ado, I'm going to switch over here to Chelsea out in the woods and let her take it away and introduce herself. Back to you, Chelsea.
And Rachel, let me know how we're doing on time too. So I know with where I'm at, we may run into the sun starting to set and it may get a little bit dark on us. So the webinar is scheduled to go until 8:30, but I may try to wrap it up a little bit closer to 8, so we have time while there's still light before the sun starts to set, to answer questions and show you anything while I still have the light, because I am outside in the woods here. I am at one of our parks right now. I'm at Pioneer Park, which actually used to be a state park, and then it got turned over to us at Mitchell County Conservation. So I am a naturalist with Mitchell County Conservation Board, and I've been here for 9 years. I have been a wild edibles instructor for over 11, and I like to joke with people that I haven't lost a student yet, at least not that I know of. And I'm still here. So practicing good, safe foraging and just having fun with it. So tonight we're kind of focusing on fallberries and fungi, just because I like to keep it seasonal. And when people are starting to have a curiosity about wild edibles or foraging, it can seem a little bit overwhelming at first. There's a lot to learn. There's always something new to learn. So where do you start? And so I try to keep it seasonal. And I do have an in-person class this weekend if anybody wants to attend. It's up here in very north, and a little bit eastern Iowa. And I think Rachel's going to get some links for that program as well. So mushroom foraging. I actually got excited about this program last night because I watched the Fantastic Fungi documentary on Netflix right now. Beautiful cinematography, super inspiring. And so I hope that this session will inspire you, pique your curiosity, and give you some resources to start your fall foraging, whether it be into fruits or into fungi. So I wanted to focus on fall fruits and fungi because it is harvest season. So it's harvest season from our gardens and it's harvest season in the woods. Now, most of us think of foraging for mushrooms in the spring. If you're going to think of some kind of mushroom to eat from the woods, it's typically the morel or oysters that we find generally starting in the spring. But the fall is actually much higher in the number of species that are growing and reproducing, and a higher number of edible species. But they are a little bit different than what you're thinking as far as a morel. So I wanted to start with the fruits, and then we'll move over into the fungi, just because when we first start into the world of foraging, it's the number one safety tool. The number one skill is always identification. And I tell people that are first getting into this that maybe don't have a degree in biology or ecology like I do, plants are a good place to start, and in particular fruits, because fruits are what they are. They're meant to be attractive. So they're very conspicuous and they're very familiar. So they haven't changed a whole lot through the domestication process. And that's kind of where foraging is started for me. So every food that we eat now, if it's real food, has a wild origin somewhere in the world, or it had one. For example, cattle had a wild ancestor, the auroch, which are now extinct. But through domestication, we have, cattle now. And so we have to kind of start flipping back the pages of history, delving into the world of plant families or fungi, and discovering where our food comes from. Might not be North America, might not be even the Americas at all, but it has a wild origin somewhere. And fruits are an easy place to start because, like I said, we've been eating fruits forever. Fruits are tasty, they're attractive, and they're fairly easy to harvest. And so when you get good at identifying plants, and particularly starting with fruits, then it's easier to transition over into identifying fungi. So again, with everything, practice safety. The easy way to stay safe is, unless you're 100% sure of what you've collected or what you're looking at, don't eat it. And then to be 100% sure, I have a lot of resources that I'm going to share with you. I love books. I have some blogs and Facebook pages, and people like me that come out and hang out with me. We have several foraging instructors across Iowa, attend an in-person event, and those are the best ways to start learning. And you can ask questions. I will have all of my contact information available, so send me a text message, send me an email, send me a Facebook message, and let me know what you're looking for. Let me know you're out in the woods and what you're finding. And if it is simple as, hey, is this a dandelion? I'm happy to help answer that for you, because I'd rather give you that confidence or help build that confidence than have you guys, attend these webinars or attend a program and still feel nervous, like you can't go out and harvest things. And fortunately, fruits and mushrooms are, as far as state public land and generally county conservation public areas, are things that are allowable for public harvest. So that makes it fairly easy to access as well. So how do I start figuring out what I have? Well, first off, you need to be in the woods. You need to be out and about in nature, which is an amazing side benefit to this foraging. Or maybe foraging is a side project or activity to enact something you already do outside, whether you're hunting or fishing or bird watching or fat tire biking or any of those outdoor recreation activities. This is something you can do along with it. I like to say, especially for our hunters and fishers, if you have a little bit of wild foraging knowledge, no matter what happens hunting or fishing, you can probably come home with some kind of harvest, something to show for your time, which is nice. So I love books. I have a whole stack here, and this is only just a small fraction of the collection I have at home, but I tried to make it very pertinent. And I know Rachel will be working furiously to try to type in and give you the link to these books. But the basis of this program, if you're going to only invest in a couple books, I would say my favorites for starting learning with fruit and with fungi are Teresa Maroney's set of wild berries and fruits for Illinois, Iowa, and Missouri, and then the mushrooms of the upper Midwest. And I'll try to give you a little bit of a close-up of those. Now, the reason I like these for beginners, they're nice size to just stick in your pack and walk around. They're not too heavy or bulky. And they don't focus just on edible species, because if you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know what you're looking for. And so you're going to start looking at everything you come across. These books are nice because it helps guide you in figuring out what you have. And then after you've double checked, triple checked, looked through several different books, checked on an online forum, and you're 100% sure you have what you have, then you can talk about edibility. And then comes along flavor or personal preferences with fruits and fungi. So we're going to take a little walk here in a little bit through the woods, and we're going to see a berry. And it's nice if you are just taking a walk along the side of the trail and you see a berry, generally you can identify what color it is. In this case, the one that we're going to be looking at is blue. But you can flip to, I'm going to try to tilt it so you can see, you can flip to the blue section of the book and start looking for your plant. And it's nice. I'm not going to give it away what we're looking at here in just a little bit yet, but it's nice because it'll tell you up in the corner whether or not it's edible. It generally tells you how it grows, where it grows, and it's really hard to see in this edition. I know in some of the newer editions, it's a little bit clearer, but the key characteristics are written in like an olive green ink. And so you can kind of use that as a checklist, like everything in that olive green ink, check, 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 check. All right, this is probably my fruit. Maybe I'll ask somebody just to double check, but it's kind of a nice, easy guide for beginners. The mushroom guide works the same way, except it's based on the shape of the fungi up in the corner. And again, it does speak on the edibility generally at the bottom, and it will list in the front the top tasties in green and the top toxics in red with their skull and crossbones. And I don't think my camera is going to pick it up, but on this one, you can see the different colored ink a little bit better, or font, to again use that as a check mark. Now, it doesn't have everything that you're going to come across. I've got quite a selection on the table here. Not everything is in there, but it gives you a good place to start as far as I'm going to look in this family of mushrooms to try to figure out what I might have. So I also have a stack here of some of my other favorites. beginning foraging. This is from Ellen Zacco. So backyard foraging, it's great because like I said, I learned in a previous post or a previous webinar, I said I learned that you can eat hostas from this book. So if you have a backyard, this is a really nice, easy and familiar plants guide. It uses some landscaping plants and things, not generally only stuff from the wild. Sam Thayer's collection of books, Forager's Harvest, Nature's Garden, and Incredible Wild Edibles are amazing. He's fairly local. He's in Wisconsin. And so everything as far as the species and the very beginning, he has a really handy collection guide here. So I'm going to try to find that for you and show you quick. So you can kind of plan out your harvest. Once you sort of know what's in your area, here it is. It'll tell you when things are coming in and out of seasons. And so that's a really handy guide. It's fairly accurate, adjust within a few days or so across Iowa. So really, really handy for that. And then I have a whole stack of mushroom guides. I have a few other plant ones that I can give to Rachel and pass out in the chat or in an email. But I am truly fascinated by fungi. I think they're beautiful, intriguing creatures. And so I have a whole stack of different mushroom guides. I'm only going to talk about a few just because I don't want to overwhelm everybody and cause Rachel to freak out trying to get all this information to you. But just some really easy ones. Like I said, the Teresa Maroney one's just a nice little handy back pocket guide. This Mushrooms of North America is pretty accurate for Iowa. So that's a nice one. And that is by George Barron. It's got nice photos as well. And so I always like a good photo. Doesn't have a ton of information per each fungus, but enough to help you out. And it does break it up into families. So you can kind of start to see similarities within the genera. Mushrooms of Illinois. I know it's Illinois, but again, it's pretty accurate to Iowa. Again, some nice photos, tells you how to know some of these species, not a huge diversity. And these are just focusing on edible species. So it does give you some recipes in the back and some ideas that way. Same with Wild Edible Mushrooms by Hope Miller. Again, just focusing on edible species that are mostly found in Iowa. This was my my textbook for mycology at Iowa State and written by the late great Lois Tiffany. And so it is a little bit more academic in its layout, but it has nice pictures, a decent description, and what I find most useful, whether it's with plants or animals or fungi, no matter what, a dichotomous key. So a this or that type question, you can start going through and you get two questions. Does your thing you're looking at have this or that? And it'll send you down the line, kind of like a choose your adventure. And so at the end, you can look up and read about wherever thing you landed on. And if it matches, great, you have found the answer to your question. And if it doesn't match, you can kind of start going and backtracking, figuring out, all right, well, maybe it actually had this characteristic instead. And this book is basically a huge dichotomous key. It's very thorough. If you go to mushroomexpert.com, this is the guy that runs that page. So this is Mushrooms of the Midwest by Michael Puo. Again, it's a little bit more advanced, but it is very thorough. The only thing I don't like about this book is it really is based off of the dichotomous key, how things are ordered, instead of by like families. So it is sometimes a little bit harder to compare alike things because you'll have very different genera on each page, but it does do a good job of leading you down the right path. So It also only uses, in general, scientific names, which are the best way to make sure that we're all talking about the same species, besides local colloquialisms or local names or common names. But it is kind of frustrating for beginners because they don't have a common name then to associate with a certain fungus. But very, very thorough. And I do reference this a lot, especially when I'm trying to figure out something new to me. So I have a few others here. Again, I will list those to Rachel if she's not furiously working already. And those should be a good place to start as far as if you want to make an investment in a book. There's also Iowa Foragers on Facebook, the Midwest Wild Edibles and Foragers Society. Iowa has a Midwest Prairie States Mushroom Club, which is really fun to go out on a foray or a search and collect mission. We'll go on a very, very small one today. And there's also a couple blogs that I like. So I will list those, and one of them is Learn Your Land. And that one, he's based in Pennsylvania, but really, really great presenter, has a lot of videos on YouTube that make things, his presentation style is very calming, very easy, and I appreciate his style of teaching very, very much. So so those are just a couple sources. Again, we'll try to get all of those lists of resources to you. Today, while I was searching for some pictures, I came across this really fun free comic. It's by Treehouse magazine. So I just printed it off, but this was a really fun, especially if you're out foraging with kids and wanting to explore the world of mushrooms. So this is called the Treehouse Nature Adventure Magazine for Kids, and it's all about the magical and mysterious mushroom. And one of the things I really liked about it was included in the download, and it was free. You had to download each little page separately. Was a really nice Spore Print paper with all of the information you might want. And it lists the different spore colors by genera. And so depending on your color, you can start to narrow down where you might be starting to look for identification. And also it has, collected by location, habitat, any other notes. So that was actually really, really nice. Even though it was just a kid's book. So I'm going to reference this here in a little bit. But that was really a fun find I just got today. So I want to talk about some of the gear that I use when foraging for fruits and for fungi. So I know you can just barely see it off to the corner here, but baskets are my absolute favorite collection tool. So I've got many different baskets. I picked this one up and this one at a estate sale for $1 each. They are kind of like a grapevine basket. The reason I like baskets is it lets dirt out, bugs can crawl out. And if you're into collecting mushrooms, there is some evidence that the spores can drop out, but that's kind of a mixed theory, but it still allows a lot of air movement, keeping your fungi nice and fresh. No plastic bags, they'll get all slimy and nasty. I really like this other small basket I have down here. This is generally my mushroom basket, but sometimes, like the mushroom we're going to go collect here in a little bit, this isn't big enough. So a nice collection of baskets. For fruits, baskets also work really well. And I talked about this in my summer webinar, but this has come in handy. I was just using this to collect wild cherries last week. So this is called a blicky. Now, I'm not going to endorse any brands, but a blicky, very blicky box, yes, that's a real word, is, this is a really good brand because it's square. And I'm going to start collecting these at the recycling center because I want to make more blickies. But it's a square-sided container. This does have a handle built in, and it does have a lid. I just don't have it with me right now. But what I did was I used 2 pieces of paracord, and I just drilled 2 holes in the back. and I used a washer to help make sure that that wasn't going to pull through my holes. And the way that I use it is kind of like those drawstring bags. So I cross it over on my back, and then I loop up one side over one shoulder, and the other side over the other shoulder, and then it just hangs. So I have my hands free to collect any berries that I might be finding. It works really well in combination with a berry hook. Again, I talked about this in my summer webinar, but this is kind of my pride and joy of the summer. This is a recycled, this is actually a mop handle. So it has the extension on it, which is really awesome. It already had a hole in this end, and what I used was a metal, like a plant hanger, and attached it through that hole. And then I did drill a hole on the end to attach a loop of paracord. Now the way that this works in conjunction with the blicky box is I take this cord or this loop and I put my foot through it. I know you can't see. I put my foot through it, and then the hook up here hooks around your branch. So I was collecting cherries, and so I hooked the top on my cherry branch, and the pressure of the tree pulling back on you holds it in place. So the branch is hanging down right in front of you, and then with your blicky box, you have two hands free to collect. Now I'm holding it because I don't have a branch right here, but I would then be able to have both hands free to collect my harvest in the blicky box. So I think I sent some pictures to Rachel when I talked about my summer berries program on how to make this, but I just was really lucky in finding this mop handle. So if you have an old mop handle laying around, it makes a really great berry hook. All right. Some of my other tools, it's always really nice to have something bright to wear in the woods, especially if you're on public ground. So just to let other people know that you're in the area, so you're not mistaken for a turkey or something in the springtime. So something bright that you can just toss on. I like to have a small trowel, gloves. I have another bag here. This was just made out of a t-shirt. So it was a friend's company called Will Forage for Food. So it's my friend Rachel, and she's in Michigan, but that was a nice easy bag. And I think there's still there's little bits of chicken of the woods mushrooms laying around in there. So don't take it to the grocery store because it's really embarrassing when you have dried bits of forage food in your bags. So I also have my trusty mushroom stick, and my late father-in-law customized this one for me. It's got a metal piece on the end that I can use for digging. And then of course, for the inspiration, it's got a morel carved onto the end. So these are really nice to have for balance, for moving vegetation out of the way, for getting a mushroom off of the tree that's really high. So just lots of different uses, but you have to remember to take it with you. So a morel mushroom hunting legend that I follow is that if you're using a mushroom stick to go hunting for mushrooms, and it's the one that you pick up in the woods because you forgot your good one at home. So if you pick up a stick in the woods to use as a mushroom stick, before you leave, you have to snap it in half and sacrifice it back to the mushroom gods. Otherwise, the next time you go foraging, you're not going to find anything. So important rule to keep in mind. I don't know if it's true, but I always do it just in case. So I wanted to check our time, but so I don't know if Rachel, if you can give me a time update, but I'm going to move into some of the stuff that I brought with me today, and just to kind of give you an idea of how I'm identifying these things and what's available right now. So again, I'm in northern Iowa, very northern Iowa. So if you're in southern Iowa, it might be a little bit different, or kind of at least further south than me in general. But in general, these are the things that are harvestable right now. And again, practice good outdoor ethics. So harvest only what you're going to use. Perfect, 701, thank you. Harvest only 1/3 of the general population is a good rule of thumb to follow. So 1/3 for you, 1/3 for wildlife, and 1/3 for the plant or fungi's reproduction. Now with fruits and fungi, they are the reproductive structure. They are designed to spread the plant or the mushroom. So they want to go with you. They want to go somewhere else. They want to be collected or in an area and moved to spread spores. So with fruits and fungi, that 1/3 rule is not as, it's still important to only collect what you're actually going to use, because there are wildlife that use these things as well for food. But it's akin to picking an apple off the tree. You're not harming the plant by collecting the fruit. You're not harming the fungus overall by collecting what we call the mushroom or the fruiting body. So, but do be in mind, keep in mind to harvest from safe areas where you have permission. Areas that have not been sprayed, so like railroad tracks and waterways and roadsides generally have a lot of runoff or pollution that can run into that area, overspray, those types of things. But again, the state ground, you can collect fruits, berries, and mushrooms without any kind of licensing. The only exceptions would be if you were to sell it, and ginseng is also protected. You have to have a license, and golden seal is also protected. So just look at your local laws, talk to the land managers and see, hey, do you care if I go out and collect whatever fruit or mushroom you're after? And be in contact with your local conservation officers too. So my local conservation officer is always asking me and attending my programs, because we have different cultural groups that have a tradition of harvesting certain plants and mushrooms, and he didn't know what they were. So it's really fun to learn about how different cultures use them, but also let the land managers and the officers know what you're up to. So it's more fun for them to recognize, hey, that's just Chelsea out there collecting, chicken of the woods mushroom, instead of, hey, who's that person and what are they doing? Like, it kind of removes that suspicion right away. So I'm going to start with the fruits, like I said, because that's an easy place to start as far as identification. So when I talk about how to know a plant, I don't just say identification, because I truly want you to know these like a member of your family, like a friend. You can recognize a friend on the trail. So what that means is knowing kind of the habitat they like, who else likes to grow by them, what do they look like in the spring, what do their flowers look like, what do the unripe fruits look like, what do the leaves look like, how are they branching off of the plant, all of those different things. Is it a plant that takes 2 years to grow or just one, and what does it look like in those different stages? And so really getting to know a plant and starting with just 5, let's say you don't know anything, but maybe you could identify a black raspberry. After that, pick 5 fruits, 5 berries, and say, or plants. And I'm going to learn those 5 really, really well. And then the next year, I'm going to pick 3 more or 5 more. And as you work through your identification skills, again, using those dichotomous keys, this or that, looking at branching, looking at small details to really differentiate these things, you'll have a whole list of, after a few years, you're going to be better and better, and it's going to grow exponentially how you know different plants and the ones that you do know. And then that information and skill with identification transfers over to starting with fungi, because there does need to be a detailed eye on some of these guys. So what's available right now, and what am I calling a fruit? So it is the reproductive structure. It is going to have a seed in it, or it's going to have pollen or something that is going to help this plant reproduce. And so right off the bat, when I went out today, I found maybe something not typical of what you might have in your head, but this plant should look fairly familiar. Now it's intertwined on a milkweed, and I'll show it a little bit closer here. So I'm going to unwind. So it is a vine. So just noticing its growth habit. And when you touch this plant, it's very friendly. It doesn't have thorns, but it's very sticky, I'll say. But sticky like a cat's tongue is sticky. It's kind of rough or sandpapery almost. And so it does almost kind of stick to you as you're collecting it. But the fruits on there, probably not your typical fruit, are called cones. And may look familiar to those of you that enjoy having a nice micro local brewed beer. So there's a leaf shape. And things to notice, the leaves do have teeth or little sharp points on the edges. Generally, they are 3-lobed, although this guy only has 2, so he just has a thumb there. And those cones are very distinctive. Now, what you would be after with this plant, if you were going to use it for its traditional use, would be the lupulin, these little almost kind of globular yellow structures at the base of each of the leaves of the cone. And if you don't recognize it by now, this is a hops vine. So this is a wild hops, and you could use it for brewing. It doesn't have as much of the lupulin, that bittering agent, which acts as a preservative in beer. But my husband has made beer with this. So it was a truly wild brew, which is kind of fun. So we also have a local brewery here that I'm going to tell him he has used some wild edibles in his brewing. So kind of a fun thing. I'm going to let him know where I saw a bunch and see if he wants to make a local hops beer. So that one does happen to be edible. Another one that is very attractive in the woods right now, like I said, berries are by design attractive. They want some mammal or bird to come along and eat them, gobble them up. They provide a fruity or fleshy exterior that is appealing, but really they're using us for their own will. And they hope that if you really want to, become one with the natural cycle here, you'd have to continually use the restroom in the woods, but there's some sanitation issues with that. But the fruits have seeds inside, and that's what the plant wants you to do, is to eat the fruit. The seeds don't usually get processed by who's ever eating it. And sometimes the stomach acid actually helps this plant germinate. So it's called scarification. And this one is very, very attractive, very bright. Seems like it would make a good decoration for fall events coming up. But that'd be about all you'd want to use it for. So this comes into play where you see this kind of collection of berries. Very, very bright. Some of them are still green. But this is where I would get out that book, the Wild Berries book, and start looking through the red section. This is pretty distinctive. It's also fairly large. And so those are things that are going to help you. The leaves of the plant are very much decayed and kind of slimy and gross. So just this fruiting structure is what's left to really help you right now. So I would start flipping through the red section of the book, and I'm going to look for that conglomeration or that collection of berries in a cluster. And I'm just literally going to start flipping through. Now I know what it is, but if you don't, that is how you start. So pictures are really, really great. I'm just going to kind of flip through until I find something that looks kind of similar. So I might stop here at American ginseng, but when you look at the fruiting structure of this plant, it's not as large, and it's kind of more flat and round, whereas this one is much more conical or cone shaped, almost like a Christmas tree shape. And so that would be kind of what I'm looking for as I'm flipping through. Now, this is why I like to have lots of different books. So if you look closely, the actual ripe berries are not the largest picture on this page, but this is my plant. This is Jack in the Pulpit. So it's got the berries when they are green with the leaves, and then the ripe berries down in the corner. So it's in the red section, but it might not stand out to you right away. And I will go through and check those olive colored characteristics just to make sure that this is my plant. But it says up in the corner, not edible. And it says all parts of the plant contain calcium oxalate crystals, which can cause an intense burning sensation if eaten. So not only not edible, but really not pleasant if you try it. So not gonna kill you, but not a fun experience. I have not tried it, so, and I'm not going to. But that's kind of how I use this book. A couple other things right now that are very attractive out in the woods. I've got two different versions of related species here, neither of which are edible. So this one has white berries, and in almost all cases, white berries are not edible or toxic. So if you find white berries in the woods, fun to learn what they are, just to recognize some of the plant diversity in the woods. But for us humans, these are not edible. This is called white baneberry, and this one is red baneberry, and the name should help give it away. These are toxic. Bane as in, something very bad, but they have leaves, very compound leaves here. So compound as in there are several leaflets coming off of a main leaf structure. Both of them have similar leaf structure, but again, it just is looking at the red or the white berries, comparing how the leaves are growing, the time of year, and just looking at the small details of the plant, looking at the number of lobes and the number of teeth on the edges of the leaves. All of those things are going to help you. There's no thorns, those types of characteristics. Now this one is very, very loaded with fruit right now. Unfortunately, I did find this one in one of our parks. This is an invasive species. This is buckthorn. And this is where growth habits really will help you. So, like I said, you're learning to know these plants, not just identify them. And I really do appreciate when people message me asking questions, because it keeps my identification skills honed and I don't become lax in my identification. So this is a small tree that kind of grows in the understory, has these black circular fruits on it. Very, very nice, tasty looking fruits. It has some small teeth on the edges of the leaves. But the way the fruits come off of the branch is really what helps distinguish it from something that it could look similar to, which would be one of our wild cherries, our choke cherry in particular. But you would help distinguish those. Number one, taste-wise, these taste terrible. So if you find what you think might be a choke cherry tree, and it just tastes absolutely terrible, could be that you mistook it for a buckthorn. Now, buckthorn's not going to kill you, but it really doesn't taste good at all. Also, cherries, wild cherries and domestic cherries, we know have one singular pit inside. When I open up the buckthorn, there are at least two small round seeds inside, so that also helps me. And cherries, when you see them flower, their flower is very elongated with these little blossoms coming off the side. And that is exactly how the fruits end up coming in the structure too. So there'll be kind of a petiole or a stem hanging down with the fruits branching off of that. On the buckthorn, they're kind of have kind of a collection up very close to the branch. And they're all singular. They're not on one kind of berry cluster hanging down. So paying attention to the small details when you're collecting too, not just blindly harvesting everything. So everything that goes into your bucket, just kind of give it a second glance before you toss it in to make sure you have what you want to have. And finally, part of the inspiration for this program. Now, I should have very heavy leather gloves on collecting this, but I do not. So I have 5 leaflets on this leaf, and they're very large. So compared to my hand, which I don't have huge hands, but it's bigger than my hand is wide and long. And there are some pretty, I'm trying to hold it so you can see in the background. There are some pretty aggressive thorns on this plant. It does have kind of a very small teeth on the edges of the leaf, but the leaflets are very round. And on the stalks, they have kind of, if you were to take a cross section of them, they almost have a star shape. So there's little ridges on this cane. And the berries should look familiar. It should look, like something you might see in the grocery store, because again, it hasn't changed much over time. Domestication has not changed this plant a whole lot. But it's very, very tall. So it can be upwards of, some of the canes could be like 7 foot tall, 6 to 7 feet tall. And it's overall a very robust, large plant. And this is how you can kind of compare it to something that might look similar, but they fruit at different times. So that's also an indication. Black fruit, it's red when it's unripe. And in the early summer, late spring, early summer, we will have black raspberries ripening on some thorny canes, but they are much smaller. Their leaflets are more pointed. I have some right in front of me. I'll grab to compare. So here is a black raspberry leaf. So those leaflets are much more pointed. And this leaf in general is much smaller. So it is about the size of my hand. The back sides are very light green, very light colored compared to the front. And just to make sure we know what we're talking about, this plant, the back sides of their leaves are just green. They don't have that kind of whitish color. So this blooming now, or fruiting now, and it's just getting to the end of this fruiting season. This is a blackberry, but it's an aggregate fruit, lots of little tiny fruits on one, and compared to the black caps or black raspberries that we get earlier in the summer. Generally, these aren't as sweet, but they do make a nice jam, and they're a little bit more seedy than the black raspberries. So when I'm making like a jam or a jelly, I try to reduce the seeds by about half, but still really yummy and a fun find. You could make a pie and all sorts of things that you do with berries with this as well. Really, really yummy on top of ice cream. But of course, what is it? And finally, for our fruits, I have this one. So the birds will often get some of the fruits before you do, so keep an eye on it. This plant, it's really easy to find in the spring because the white flower clusters are huge and beautiful and smell nice. They almost look like lace doilies, which they are also edible. But branching, it has opposite branching. So the leaves are coming off the branch like the YMCA versus the walk like an Egyptian dance where it would be alternating sides. So one would be up over here and the other one would be down on this side. Also, I use a little mnemonic or rhyme where green meets brown, simpler compound. So this branch is brown, but this is green. So I'm going to pull this off. And what I'm holding in my hand then is the leaf with many leaflets on it. So this one has 2, 4, 6, 7 leaflets, although it looks like it's got a little bit of a number 8 branching off there. Has a very finely toothed edge. And those berry clusters are kind of flat. The ripe fruits are almost purpley black. And the little stemlets that they come off of often are sort of a bright reddish purple. This one is a little bit more green because there are some green berries left on there. Now this one, when you open it up, will have almost like a crescent moon shaped seed inside, 2 seeds generally, or 1. And not going to taste real great just off the plant. And you shouldn't eat too many of them just raw. They really do need to be cooked. So cook them down into a syrup or a jam or a jelly. Turn them into gummies or a syrup that you keep in the fridge, because this you pay big bucks for at the health food store. It's used in the wintertime to help boost your immunity. Whether you subscribe to some of those folk medicine anecdotes is up to you. I don't get into medicinal things because it's a very personal journey, but there's good stuff, and a lot of antioxidants in here. And this is the scientific name, which you would often find it in the store under Sambucus nigra, but this is black or just common elderberry. So elderberries are ready right now. And you want the all black berry clusters. So that's generally what I have right now, just in a quick afternoon, looking around what I have ready. We'll see another berry as we walk back to visit our mushroom area. So after you get good at fruits, you can start moving on to fungi. And I have kind of just a small collection of, again, what I found this afternoon, but I wanted to use these as a demonstration for how to identify or how to work on your identification, what's out. And again, fall is the time for fungi because it's just much more diverse. You can find all sorts of amazing things versus in the spring. So a couple special tools that I use for, perfect, about 7:30, a couple special tools that I use for my mushroom fungi identification. Again, my books. And there are no rules of thumb in nature. Mother Nature does not like to follow rules. And so some people have heard like all mushrooms that grow on wood are edible, or, all berries that have that, kind of aggregate fruit like a raspberry are edible. So I always say there are no rules of thumb. There are old mushroom hunters and bold mushroom hunters, but there's not both. And you can eat anything once, but it's if you eat again, that's your test of your identification skills. So kind of some funny things, but really preaching safety. So I look at every plant every time, every mushroom every time, and I look it up. Even though I know some of them by heart, I still double check because I would not want to make a mistake, and I wouldn't want anybody that I'm teaching to make a mistake. That can be simply avoided by double checking. So I don't get too overconfident with my identification skills. Plus, there's always something new to learn, a new learning from other foragers, a new little fun way to make sure I can tell one from the other that maybe isn't listed in a book. So books are my go-to. I do like to use a little looper. This is just a very cheap plastic one, but helps you get some up close and personal views of the undersides or pore surfaces or gill structure on some of these mushrooms. I also have a notebook for writing down my notes at the time. Those little fast food boats, their paper, are really nice to kind of put your collection in. Like you can put one mushroom in one of those little paper boats with some notes, and then use that to help you identify it when you get back to your books, because I don't carry this big stack of books with me in the woods. That's too much. That is another thing while you're learning. Some people may argue this, but while you're learning, my personal opinion is that it's okay to harvest a plant, a mushroom, if you don't know what it is, to take back home for further study. In fact, with fungi, taking it home at least overnight is part of the identification process, because you need to do a spore print. So if you're not collecting, gobs and gobs of something before you know what it is, personally, I find that a really good way to learn. So taking back one specimen and studying it, comparing it in person with your books, is something I really encourage my students to do. But again, keep your ethics in mind, only one specimen to use for learning. I also have just some empty Tupperwares, no lids, because I use these for spore print covers. And I have a collection of black and white paper. Now you could use white and some other color. You can also use tin foil for taking a spore print. But spore prints are a key feature. The color is a key identifying feature for many different fungi. So I did take a few spore prints earlier of some fungi. Now I have not identified this one yet, but here's why we use black and white. So you take the cap or the fruiting structure. So on this one, it's just a little fan. It's very thin. But I'm going to put the poor side down over top, overlapping both the black and the white piece of paper. And then I would cover it with my Tupperware and let it sit overnight, or at least let it sit for a few hours. And the reason you use both colors, because you don't know what that spore print color is going to be. If it's a dark spore print, it'll show up better on the white paper. If it's a light spore print, it'll show up better on the dark. And in this case, my spore print was white. And there are some really beautiful, if you start to learn your mushrooms, there's some really beautiful art projects you could do. So this picture is really small. I'm sorry, it printed off kind of weird. But if you look up Spore Print Art, there's some really fun projects you can do. Really quite gorgeous things. This is a good example too. So it has green spore, shows up on both the black and the white, but that's why you use the two different colors to help distinguish it. Now this one, I know what this fungi is, but I still wanted to do an example because it has pores on the bottom instead of gills. And again, it's really going to be hard to see, but this one showed up better on the black side, but I can see it. You can almost see it a little bit right here. It's kind of a very, very light cream color. So it's not completely white, but that would help me identify, going through my books, the spore color. And it's kind of fun. So fungi.
Hey, Chelsea.
Yeah, go ahead.
Someone mentioned that you can also do a spore print on a piece of glass and then put different color paper behind it to see the color. So just wanted to share that with folks.
You can go to like the Restore or use, old pieces of glass that you have sitting around. You can get specific spore print glass to use, and then you could wipe it down. That's really helpful if you want to start harvesting and propagating mushrooms at home. You can collect wild spores and inoculate logs and stuff by using the glass spore print. You can harvest that off. You can't really harvest it off the paper. So that's another really fun tool to use when you're collecting spores. So fungi, like I said, I think that's all my tools. fungi are what we think of as the mushroom is the reproductive structure, the fruiting body. Most fungi, I'm going to come up closer so you can see this. The bulk of fungi are actually made up of these very tiny, you can just see them there, very tiny hair-like structures called mycelium. So this is the main body, the main biomass of a fungus. And in fact, scientists have found that it is the oldest and largest living thing in the world. So there is a fungus, it's in Oregon. I can't remember the name right now, but the mycelium for this one organism spreads thousands of miles, square miles. And it's one of the oldest living things, if the oldest living thing in the world. But it's mostly all of these little hair-like mycelium. Mycelium are amazing. They can communicate with each other. They often have a symbiotic relationship with plant roots, whether they are actually invading the plant cells or going in between them, so inter and intracellular, providing nutrients to the trees and the plants in exchange for other things that the plant can give them. So amazing things. But when we think of the mushroom, let's say, it's the sexual reproductive structure. So this is, like I said, like picking an apple off of a tree. The surface somewhere on this mushroom is going to release spores, which are like microscopic little seeds to start a new mycorrhizae, a new colony of this fungal species. And so when we pick them, it does not harm the rest of the bulk of that fungus is still in its mycelial form, that little root-like form. And so this doesn't hurt it at all. In fact, it wants to spread its spores. So if you pick it up and take it somewhere else and let it sit, it's only just going to keep releasing millions of spores. And by the time we find them, oftentimes the fungus has released its spores or is actively releasing spores. Very rare can you catch it, and it takes some kind of special camera work to catch it too, like backlighting at night and things. But puffballs are a really good example, if you've ever stomped on a puffball, of seeing that sporulating fungus releasing into the atmosphere. So that is the fruiting structure there. So I do have a few species. Like I said, I find fungi fascinating. They're beautiful, they're weird, they're everywhere. And so some of these I've identified and some of them I haven't. Again, I am taking some of these back to further study them. I'm going to do a spore print. I'm going to look through my books. And so it's okay not to know. When you harvest a small specimen, there's, 100 more that I left on the tree or on the ground. I'm just using it for my own learning, and I'm only harvesting one or a very small cluster. So I have separated out my fungi based on the substrate or what it's growing on. So these over here are my wooden substrate fungi, and I have a few small ones over here that are growing either on the ground or on something else, for example. So this fungi is actually growing on some oak leaves. So some of the ones that I found just in a very short afternoon, I literally was out for half an hour walking. I'm going to take you to one out in the woods too, but I want to show you these first. So this is a really fun one. I love coral and jelly fungi. So fungus are grouped into Ascomycota and Basidiomycota. It's the microscopic structures on how the spores are released. And then there's these kind of other groups of jelly fungi and slime molds. So this is actually a jelly fungus, not a coral fungus. It doesn't really have a common name. A relative that has a common name is a yellow staghorn jelly fungus. This has the same genus, but a different species name. So it doesn't really have a common one, but it's a yellow, kind of spiky jelly fungi. And if you look, it's kind of growing in the rows between the bark and between the wood fibers. So that was an identifying characteristic. Now, this guy you wouldn't really do a spore print on because it's such a unique and distinctive structure. I found when I was identifying that one, it was not in this book. So this is kind of very common things. It's not going to have everything, which is why I like having lots of books. But it was in this book. And I identified it simply by going through the pictures, looking for similar structures. So I was in the coral fungus to begin with, because they have sort of a similar looking lifestyle, but coral fungi are almost exclusively growing on the ground. And this guy is clearly growing on wood. And so I skipped, kept looking through, and I ended up in the jelly fungus section. And here is my specimen. So there's the staghorn. Yeah, it's called the yellow staghorn fungus, but this is my guy right there. So just kind of looking at those subtle differences, reading through the descriptions, oftentimes, especially in this book, it'll give you the descriptions for species that look similar, but you can only recognize that by reading. It might not have a similar picture of that species. So read through all of the description to help you. And that's how I figured out this one, because it talked about it growing. It doesn't have those split ends, and it grows kind of linear in the plant or the wood fibers. So compare that to this beautiful guy right here. It's just a little bit past prime, but this one is in the coral fungus, and it really does look like something that should be at the bottom of the ocean. It should have, you know, beautiful tropical fish swimming around. They do come in really fantastic colors, yellows, oranges, purples sometimes. And so then we look at the color and in particular what it's growing on. Like I said, it was growing on wood, but it looked like it was growing on the ground. And so it actually might have been growing on the ground, but look very closely. But what I'm looking at is the tips, how it branches at the ends. So this is a crown-tipped coral fungi. Really, really fun to find these. You can actually eat this species. This one is too old, I would not. But when they're fresh, you can. I have not tried them yet, but my friend who wrote this book, Alan Burgo, he's the forager chef. He just released his book, Flora. He has on his blog, Forager Chef, some recipes on how to eat crown-tipped coral fungus. So I have yet to try those myself. Just kind of growing down the line here. Mother Nature was very helpful today because I was out in a wooded area that had a trail going through it. And I was just about done, and I had left the trail, walked back in the woods really quickly. And when I came back, this stick was just laying on the trail. So we did have a storm come through earlier. Hopefully anybody a little bit south of us and west of us was not too affected by the storm. We do need the rain, so I was grateful to see it, but just didn't want any damage. So this is called, I gotta remember for sure, because I always get it. There's a crepe mushroom or fungi, and this is the crowded parchment. So if you think of parchment paper kind of crinkled up, this is supposed to kind of look like that, but it's called a crowded parchment. And it's just completely covering this one. Again, I wouldn't really do a spore print on this because you'd have to kind of peel this whole structure off. But the way it grows is very distinctive. And so that's really what's going to help you. The spore prints truly come in helpful with some larger specimens and more of your mushroom structure, like the stalk and or stipe or stalk, you can call it either one, and the cap kind of a situation. So crowded parchment. This one I'm going to come up close because it's very dainty. tiny little white fungus, and the top is smooth. So this one you can kind of see is very smooth. But when I flip it over, and I don't know if it's going to show up or not with this lighting, but if I had, if I could magnify this for you, and the quality of my camera might not work, but I'm looking at the underside, and underside is absolutely essential when you're identifying mushrooms. So if you're submitting a photo to a mushroom identification group or to somebody to help you, or if you just took pictures and did not harvest a specimen from the woods, make sure you get a picture of the top, the bottom, and if there's any gills, how they attach, if there's a stalk or no stalk. So what I'm looking for in this one is I flip it over, and these two you might be able to see, and I'm sorry if you can't, but it does have gills underneath. And the way those gills are shaped, they actually have like a short gill, a long gill, a short gill, a long gill, short gill, long gill, and there's no real stalk here. And the edges, it's just a very dainty, pretty little fungus. And this is just simply called a split gill fungus. Okay, while I'm close, this one gets confused for many different things. But what I'm looking for here is this multicolored surface on the top, and the edge is white. So typically with this species, the edge band of color is going to be white or very light colored. And again, underneath, I know it's very difficult to see with my, not professional camera here, but the pores are very, very fine. They're not really large, so you can't see really big holes. They're very fine in there. And when you look at it, they're so small, it almost messes with your eyes a little bit because you're looking down into those pores. But that fine, no hairs, very fine pore surface, this is our true Trametes versicolor. This is our turkey tail. And this is also being researched for some really interesting medicinal properties. But again, that's a very personal thing to your situation. I'm not able to give you any advice there. So you can do your own research. There's some really, really interesting studies going on. But a beautiful fungus to find in the woods. Does grow on wood, decaying wood in particular, and has this kind of ruffled edge and shelf like stacked on top of each other growth habit. Compare that to the false turkey tail. I'm going to try to, so this is kind of how I saw it. This was I took a picture. It was a whole log just covered in these beautiful, kind of leafy, almost fungi. And if you notice, you can see the edge is not white on these. They're very, very thin as well. And it does still have the multicolored bands, but again, it's not white on the edge. And those edges are pretty straight, pretty smooth. They're not as ruffly as the turkey tail. And if you had your magnifying glass, you could look at the bottom of the surface, and you can't really see any pores. You can't really see any holes on the bottom. And so that is indicative of the false turkey tail. And really beautiful nonetheless. I've seen some really fun like jewelry and craft projects made with fungus too. So not just interesting to collect for edibility, but also some crafts. But again, harvest responsibly and ethically. Only what you are going to use, kind of a situation. Now, some of these similar growth habit I have not identified yet, so I'm still working on them. But growing on wood has that band, not as brightly colored as the other, and not as ruffled on the edges. So I'm working on identifying some of these others. And that's why it's fun to go out like with the prairie sage mushroom foraging group on a foray, because those guys are amazing at their identification. But fungi are a place where I still get to learn lots, which I really enjoy. So I'm going to move on to well, this guy was also growing on a tree. So this one's really good. You can see those pores underneath. I was kind of surprised to find this one this time of year because it's been very hot. But dark where the stalk kind of is, it doesn't really have a stalk so much. Very flat, growing on decaying wood, has these kind of speckly scales on top. This is a very light, old specimen here. But it's still, I'm gonna give it a sniff. It still has a kind of cucumbery, watermelon rind scent. This is an edible species when it's younger and not so tough and very old. You can kind of almost see this discoloration. There was another shelf on top, so it released its spores. It had those kind of white creamish spores. So this is a pheasant back. This is a Dryad Saddle, usually found in the spring, but it will grow in the fall too. But like I said, I was rather surprised. There's kind of that weird eye effect that those pores can do. It kind of messes with your eyes a little bit. I was surprised to find him this time of year, and it's been very dry where we are too. But one of the whole reasons I wanted to do this program this time of year was for this beauty. So this is a fungus that grows and can kind of trick you into thinking it's just like a regular gilled mushroom. This is the species that I have fairly common where I'm at. The most recognizable species is yellow and much larger. But this is the one that I have, and it's just as desirable as far as edibility. But it will trick you. On the underside, it looks like gills, and I know it's really hard to see in this camera. But what's actually happening is if you look with your magnifying glass very closely, the surface is folded. It's not actually like a separate gill that you could cut off or pluck off and remove. It's a fold. So it's like part of the flesh of the fungus. And so that is a really key characteristic for this family of mushrooms, are those false gills or folds underneath that start to decur or go down the stipe or stalk just a little bit at the very top. Often the top will have a little bit of a depression in it, so concave on the top, and they do grow on the ground. So I did try to pluck this one so you could very clearly see that it was growing in the soil. But this is a choice edible, and this is the Cinnabar Chanterelle. The like the yellow chanterelle, golden chanterelle is much more commonly used in culinary settings and probably more commonly looked for than the cinnabars, but very, very bright reddish orange in the woods. And so, but they don't get very, these are fresh. We did just rain in the last couple of days. Fine. I don't know if you can see the false gills on that one a little bit coming down. But they don't get a whole lot bigger. The biggest ones I ever found are maybe 3 inches tall and maybe about 1.5 inches wide. These are pretty fresh growing still. But I have collected quite a few of those and used in some yummy dishes. There are a few look similars with that bright orange color. The toxic one in particular, the jack-o'-lanterns can be sometimes confused for this one. Jack-o'-lanterns are pretty cool to collect though, because they're one of the bioluminescent ones. So they actually glow in the dark. And I did test this out. It had to be at a really, really dark spot. And it did let off kind of a greenish glow. So that was kind of a fun one to find. And I did find at the same time I was collecting my Cinnabar Chanterelles. So again, just paying attention, looking at each thing you're collecting and putting in your basket. And again, when you clean it, and again, before you cook it, and again, before you put it in your mouth, like just really make sure you're identifying things correctly, and don't be afraid to ask if you're unsure. So I'd rather somebody ask and find out for sure than not know and make a mistake, or not know and not participate in this fun activity. So just to finish up, I'm going to try to keep to that 8 o'clock time to kind of wrap up so I have time for questions. I know we had quite a few signed up, so I'm guessing that there are going to be some collection or questions, but I am going to take you out in the woods here to another couple species, another berry and another mushroom that I really wanted to show you, which is the whole reason I used this location today. Besides, I actually had internet that I could connect and talk to you guys today. So I'm gonna grab my iPad here. We are going to go into the woods. I'm gonna flip my camera around here. There we go. So it's there's a field right over there. Nothing really deep, dark in the woods here. We're right on the edge of a campground. But I'm gonna take you along to 2 species, reflecting what we've talked about tonight. So hopefully we tested out the connection earlier and it seemed good. So that was nice. And my light is starting to fade. So if I can't find the one species on the way in, we'll get it on the way out. I'm just kind of looking here, and some of you might be watching and already have a guess where I'm headed here, because it's a very conspicuous specimen. And it literally looks like it's glowing. It is not bioluminescent, but in the fading lights and just the nature of this mushroom, it is very, very bright. So here we have, in nature, we hear about camouflage and we hear about warning coloration. Fungus don't follow that at all. They're just out here doing their own thing, being flamboyant, crazy colors for no reason. So this is a species that, thinking in the warning coloration, we maybe would be like, oh, hey, I better not eat that because it's really brightly colored. It's trying to warn me of something. But that's how we identify this one. There are 2 variations of this genus. This is the yellow pored version. There is a white pored version as well. I have not found the white pored version in my area, but some people report that it tastes even better than this yellow pored version. I have not had that comparison side by side to give a verdict on that. I would imagine they're both delicious. I know this one is. So this is a pretty prime specimen here. It's not infested with bugs yet, and the pore surfaces are pretty juicy. So this is a pretty substantial fungus. So just to compare this little cluster over here with my hands, and that's kind of how this one grows. It usually grows in large clusters. They sort of grow shelf-like, stacked on top of each other, kind of knobby, kind of gnarly looking, a little bit of some ruffling on the edges, and growing on decaying wood. So this is a sulfur shelf, or also known as chicken of the woods. Very commonly used term for this species. And I like the chicken of the woods, not because it looks like a chicken, because it truly has the texture of chicken breast, and it is reminiscently flavored, I think, of chicken breast as well. Chicken breast is pretty mild. And now it does have its own yummy mushroom flavor, but especially somebody that is, vegan or trying to get some different proteins, mushrooms are amazingly healthy. And this one really could be used as a chicken breast substitute. And that's how I cook with it. I use it kind of any way I would use chicken. So I actually am going to harvest this one off camera just because I need both of my hands to do that. There's some more growing right on the other side. So This is a favorite find of mine, and it is out right now, even though we have been very dry. So, a couple characteristics to look for there. And it's hard to see in this light, but it does have a yellow pore surface underneath, not the white. The white one is also edible. So I'm going to move back to and hopefully cut my other berry pieces on the way out. Like if I don't see it.
Hey, Chelsea.
Yeah.
We're having a hard time hearing you right now. I don't know if you cover. Oh, there you go. You covered your microphone.
Is it better? I might have covered up the microphone. Sorry, guys. Just as I'm walking out, there's a green Jack in the Pulpit, so it hasn't started turning red yet. Okay. Here it is. So here's another berry in the woods. So I would start looking again in my blue section. The leaves really are pretty far gone, so they're not really going to help you a whole lot. But the structure that the berry is growing in, the shape, the number of seeds inside, and the time of year are all going to help you. And that blue color is pretty distinctive. So this is blue cohosh. It is not edible. There are some reports of medicinal uses, but again, I cannot comment on that too much. So look into it if you're curious, and but otherwise, it's just a really beautiful hint of blue in the woods as you're walking out. So again, I mean, there's that chicken of the woods. You can see it from across the woods. It literally looks like it's glowing right now just because it's so bright. It's like construction road cone orange. But I'm gonna head back over to my station kind of. And like I said, I do want to allow a good bit of time to talk. And if anybody has a good way of getting these guys off your pants, let me know. Besides lots of meticulous picking, here's the culprit there. So I'm gonna open it up for questions. So I'm gonna.
All right, Chelsea, I got a couple for you.
Perfect. All right.
We're gonna stick with chicken of the woods.
Awesome. Okay.
Question is it true they tend to grow on trees hit by lightning?
Oh, I'd have to ask that tree. I don't know what happened to it. I'm not sure. That's a cool. I hadn't heard that, so I will. I'll have to start looking on any trees that get hit by lightning.
All right, and then I know we have a question about elderberry.
Yeah.
Can you comment on the taste of it after it's cooked?
After? Okay.
The question is, does it still taste like grass?
No. So when you are picking it, and when you're cooking it, the smell that comes off of it is very indicative of what it's gonna taste like. It has its own flavor, but it is very berry, red, rich, dark berry flavored. But that comes after adding a touch of acid and a touch of sugar or sweetener. It brings out that flavor. It really transforms it. So that way, if you're making a syrup, generally you're adding some kind of sugar or honey to it for preservation. So if you were just to cook those straight elderberries and not add anything to it, they're still not going to taste that great. But yeah, a little bit of acid, a little bit of sweetness completely changes the flavor. And yeah, I would associate it with a dark berry flavor, but it's its own flavor.
Perfect. Steve wanted to comment that a pumice, I can't even speak tonight, but I talk about that. Stone will help take them off.
Thank you. Yes, I usually just sit and pick them off. But yeah, I have heard that now that you say it. I'm gonna get one of those just for my woods pack, I think.
All right. Good. Another question we have, Nancy wants to know if you have any suggestions or ideas as to how people might know if an area has been sprayed for weed control, perhaps fields that butt up to public land.
So,
do you have any thoughts?
look along the fence lines. If there looks like there's been, some kind of die off along the fence line, brown vegetation, especially if it's missing, if it's all like grass or all no grass, those would be indications of what type, whether they were after broadleaves or after grass, like Roundup or something like that. So yeah, any kind of brown vegetation. But the best way is to talk to whoever manages that land, especially in public areas. Or if it's private ground, obviously you would need to have permission to be on it in the first place. So you would talk to the landowner or land manager and just ask, like, hey, do you spray for dandelions, or do you spray for mosquitoes, or things like that. So just have that open communication. It's nice to have that anyway, like I said, just to let people know what you're up to. And that way you're a friendly face in the woods instead of a suspicious face.
And this county secondary roads is also a great place to reach out to see if they're spraying ditches or anything also. So
Yep.
All right, Susie's asking about wild plums. When do they come out? How do you identify? What season are they ready to pick?
Now, I just happened to not find any plums today. So usually I akin the timing to when the kids are going back to school, is when they're ripe. And your taste buds and your nose and your fingers are going to tell you when they're peak. So some of them kind of ripen to a reddish, a blush color. Some of them ripen to more of a yellow color. So it all depends on your particular tree. But up until then, they're going to be green and hard. But just like a very, very ripe fruit at the store, it should be soft, a little bit like a peach. Think about a really ripe peach. And the skin is very tannic, very tart. But the fruit is kind of a golden color, not quite orange, but kind of golden. And you get through that skin, and that it's gonna smell sweet and taste sweet and delicious. So your nose, your taste buds, and your fingers tell you when your particular tree is at its peak. And then you have to fight the raccoons and the birds and everybody else for them. So
all right, then we have a comment back on Chicken of the Woods.
Yeah.
The comment is that chicken of woods can be found growing on trees, parasitic, or growing on living trees, parasitic, or I'm not even going to attempt the word, but it means growing on dead, decomposing wood. Starts with an S. Thank you.
Yep.
And so the thought is basically infecting the tree so they can, are compromised with physical damage or lightning. So back to the lightning strike, there's a discussion about that happening, and I just butchered that, so sorry.
Yeah, when I have found them on living trees, it generally is in some kind of wound. So yeah, inviting, just like with us, if you have a wound, it invites infection by whatever entity it may be, virus, fungal, bacterial, whatever, any of those. So yeah, there could be something to that lightning strike thing. I hadn't really thought of it that way before. But mushrooms are by nature decomposers, and so if you have a living tree that has some kind of fungal activity, it may indicate, depending on the species, the fungus, it could cause white rot or heart rot, those different types of things. So knowing your mushrooms is generally kind of a nice thing to look at the health of the trees that are in your life too. So there's some that grow on living trees, often as an infection or vector or some other thing that's happening with them, or often on dead and decaying wood. So they're breaking down the chitin, or the cellulose, in the trees that nobody else can do.
All right, we have another question about pawpaw trees.
Oh.
When can you harvest them?
Now I am not lucky enough to have pawpaws here. So there's actually some research being done by Iowa State near Nashua on how far north we can get pawpaws to grow. Nashua is still at least an hour south of me. um, so yeah, I don't get them here. But I think they are a little bit later yet. Somebody in the southern tiers or Missouri area may have to help me out on that. But at the event I teach at, which is the Midwest Wild Harvest Festival, unfortunately it is full. You can get on the waiting list. It takes place in Wisconsin. We have had people bringing fresh pawpaws to that, and it's the last weekend in September. So I would say, yeah, later for our area here, later September is the time.
And we've got some chat here. Irene and Doug are both saying September's the month for ripe pawpaws. So
Yeah.
And Doug mentioned that they do grow in very southern Iowa. So keep your eyes out, those of you that are living down south, and enjoy them for us, it sounds like.
Oh my God. Pawpaws are amazing. And if Doug is the Doug I think it is, he's the one that brought us some pawpaws, and they are so yummy. They are like the largest, correct me if I'm wrong, they are the largest native fruit in North America. Maybe something similar to avocado competition there. But they're like tropical fruits. They kind of taste like mango and banana. So good. So if you're lucky enough to have them where you are, yes, please enjoy them for me, because I don't get them here.
And we got, it looks like Carrie's coming in from northern Indiana. Apparently they have a ton, and the early ones are ripening now, but mid to late September is the rule of thumb. So good deal. All right. We got a couple. Oh, Kevin in Bellevue says they're thriving. He planted a few pawpaw trees, and
okay.
Looking at Chelsea's face,
the Quad
we're all
City
jealous.
Area, Quad City Edible Landscapes, I follow on Facebook, and I know they've done some stuff with introducing and growing and propagating pawpaws. So I live about a mile from the Minnesota border, and I keep thinking, like, if I planted on the south side of my house and I insulated in the over winter with straw bales, maybe I could get one. I'd have to have two to pollinate to grow, but they are a more southern thing. So enjoy, you southern folk.
All right. Puffball mushrooms. Do they grow here in Iowa? Yeah. And when are they at peak, if we do?
Yes. Right now, people are starting to find puffballs. I found them as early as July, but it was in a burned area, and so it changed the local ecology just a bit. We had done some prescribed burning in an old, we were restoring an Oak Savannah area. But yeah, right now is puffball time. It's been just so dry here up until the last 2 days, and they're just not growing very well yet. I have found them about this time of year. It literally looked like somebody pulled in with a semi load of soccer balls into an old woods that my family owned. And so I got gobs and gobs of them 1 year, and it was great. A lot of food. I mean, the whole thing, if you get it when they're perfectly white on the inside. I try to tell people to think of it like angel food cake. So it's kind of spongy but white, and not bug infested yet. So if you see one, keep an eye on it, and within a day it's going to be maxed out for size. They grow amazingly fast, and go get them and enjoy them.
All right. Doug commented that Quad Cities and South are best for pawpaws. He mentions that they will survive as far north as Dubuque if they're sheltered for the first couple of years, but they won't fruit as reliably. So yeah, sounds delicious.
That and persimmons, I just, I have this idea that if I baby them, but I'll just have to go visit friends and trade.
All right, there's another Puffballs comment that they made a great substitute for eggplant or in like an eggplant chicken parm.
They're and I don't necessarily like the connotation to this comment. I tend to think of it as more positive, but some people call them the tofu of the mushroom world because they're so versatile. Both, but I like tofu, so I see that as a compliment that you can use it in so many different ways. I can definitely see it being similar to eggplant in that way too. So yeah, it's you've got that kind of fluffy, spongy texture. And you can dehydrate it, you can smash them down and use them like almost like a wrap or a crust in a way too. You can do all sorts of things with puffballs. I think they're pretty fantastic because of their versatility. I don't think of them as that as a negative thing. So, and you can see it's already what 8:10 and my light's fading, so I'm glad we ended a bit early. So
all right,
keep the questions coming. I love the conversations, what you guys are curious about.
Bonnie has raised her hand, so I'm going to see if I can allow her to talk to.
Yeah.
So Bonnie, if you're there, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. And if you accidentally raise your hand, no big deal. We'll swing back to you if we can. Virginia's in Georgia. She says this is awesome. Absolutely excellent presentation. She wants to know about small brown puffballs. Do you have any thoughts, comments about small brown puffballs?
So those are fun to play with. The edible ones are the Calvatica, the skull like the big white ones. So giant puffballs. And there's some that kind of look like a skull that are a little bit smaller, but they kind of look very brain or skull-like in shape. Those are considered the edible ones. But the little brown ones, I've never found them when they are not ready to sporulate. And so then they just become fun playthings to poof and help spread their spores. So when I take kids out in the woods, I tell them that's one of the few things that they can destroy with abandon, because literally all they're doing is helping that mushroom reproduce. So have fun poofing them, but edibility wise, and there are several species. So when you say small brown puffballs, it really depends on the species. Like I said, every mushroom, every time for identification.
All right, chanterelles.
Yes.
What's the best type of terrain to find them? Fields, lightly wooded areas, heavily wooded areas?
I can only speak to my personal experience finding chanterelles. I know there are many people that have much more experience hunting for chanterelles than I do. The place where I find my Cinnabar Chanterelles, I have only found the golden chanterelles a couple times. And the terrain and landscape it was in is some wooded upland, but there's still some wet areas in that upland, and hardwood. I would not say heavy wooded, but fairly heavily wooded. I know that's not very specific, but more wooded than not, I would say. And that's, like I said, for the Cinnabars.
All right. Kevin is wondering, in a nutshell, what are the most popular edible mushrooms in Iowa?
Ooh. I could probably name like top 5. So starting early with your Morels, Chanterelles, Hen of the Woods, Chicken of the Woods, and Puffballs. Not necessarily because they are the most choice on all of those, but because they're easy to identify or easier. Again, does still take some careful looking on some of those, but also pretty ubiquitous across the state and fairly easy to find. There are some others, though, quite a few others that are very, very tasty.
Awesome. Okay. What else we got here? All right. Nancy says, thanks for the great presentation. Very informative and interesting. As a novice, she feels better prepared to begin foraging.
Yay, that's my whole hope. Yeah. I did see a question about popped up that I could see it anyway, was asking about when puffballs. So now, generally late summer, early fall is puffball season.
And then Michelle's wondering, is there a bag limit or a possession limit to mushrooms?
No, but ethically, yes. So if you are harvesting to sell in Iowa, you can only legally sell morels and oyster or golden oysters or the regular oyster mushrooms, and you have to have a license and you have to have gone through a class to get that license. The bag limits is non-existent though. However, when we are foraging, when we're doing anything in nature, keep in mind your place in the ecosystem, and only take what you're going to use. So I take what I know my family can eat at that time, or I do put away some I use it for classes, I use it for teaching, and I share it. So I don't, just be mindful and respectful of the habitat and the fact that you were, had the privilege of finding a large amount of something. So yeah, take what you're going to use, but there legally are no bag limits. No.
All right. Dave's comment is you can't leave golden oysters out of your top 5 list.
So, okay. Yeah, oysters, in particular golden oysters, they are a newcomer to Iowa, however. And if somebody's in Western Iowa, we are still trying to kind of figure out how far west they've gotten in Iowa, but they are a non-native. And so absolutely they're delicious and they are easy to identify and pretty common now, at least in the mid to eastern portion of Iowa, and to the east as well. But what their ecological impact, we're not quite sure yet. And they typically are fruiting a little bit outside of our native oyster time. So they're usually a little bit earlier and than our native oysters. So yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Top 6, we'll say.
6, there you go. Kelly gave you some kudos and then is wondering if there's a proper way to harvest the mushroom. How do you remove it?
Good question. So I failed to mention, and I just said, I'm sorry, it's getting dark. A good pocket knife is nice to have. I know you can't really see it. But you don't need a big old Rambo knife, just a little 3-inch knife. They do make mushroom knives. They've got a little curved shape to them. So there are different debates on how you should pick certain mushrooms. But I go by what keeps the mushroom the cleanest, because you don't really want to have to soak these mushrooms. Morels, people do soak them in like salt water to kind of drive out bugs and things. But personally, I'm not too worried about bugs. It's just extra protein. I'm not as careful with that, I suppose. So the reason you would tend to cut a mushroom either from the soil surface or off of a tree is just to leave the dirty part behind, and you're going to put pretty clean mushrooms in your basket then. So then all you would need to do is use a soft brush to maybe brush off any debris. It does not affect how the mushroom will continue to grow because, like I said, the bulk of that fungal mass is the mycelium, all of those millions of little root-like, hairs growing under the soil surface, under the bark, literally everywhere. So it's just sending up its apple. It's just sending up its fruit. And so if you're plucking the apple, either pulling it or cutting it off does not affect how it will grow, or it does not affect if it will come back again. It's just all environmental conditions, not how you pick it.
Perfect. Okay. Marilyn is wondering if you've tried pickling mushrooms when they're just past their prime. She loved both chicken of the woods and indigo milk caps that were pickled and then had oil added. So her comment is, don't pass them by.
That sounds delicious. Yeah, just past prime, I could see that, but like my my coral fungus from earlier in the presentation, he's quite past prime. And as we were getting ready, Rachel was laughing at me because I tossed one off behind my back because he was literally turning to mush. So yeah, definitely still within desirable edible range. But I typically, if I get my mushrooms, I eat them fresh, or I cook them up and freeze them, or I dehydrate them right from fresh. So I have not pickled them, but that sounds delicious. I could definitely see that being an amazing base for like a pasta dish or a dressing, in some kind of rice or something like that. So sounds yummy.
So we had a couple ladies ask about our Becoming an Outdoor Woman program. So again, it's traditionally a 3-day weekend in May. We host it in the spring. That way you can learn all sorts of wonderful information and then use it through the summer and the fall. And then in the fall, we traditionally have these types of webinars. We have in-person events all around the state and different webinars and clinics and that type of stuff. So if you're looking for more of this information, iowadnr.gov/BOW. I'll send these links in that email we'll get out this week. The other is our Iowa Becoming an Outdoor Woman Facebook group. So there's always chatter in there about different events that are coming up, people exploring different places around the state, and also photos of what they're finding. So if you're looking for a great community, that's another place to check out. We've got some more chat about golden oysters. People are finding them. But Reagan wants to know, besides berries and plums, what are some other fruits to look out for?
So this time of year, plums would be the main fruit, I would say, right now. And then if you're lucky to be where the pawpaws and persimmons even are fall ripening fruits. Some of the others that I can just think of right off the top of my head, hawthorns, mountain ash berries. Now the edibility or desirable range on those is kind of up to you, but we are moving from berry and really a lot of fruit selection like gooseberries and all those types of things into just elderberries, plums, crabapple, pawpaws, persimmon, and then we've been moving into nut time, so walnuts, acorns, hickory nuts, those types of things. So we're just at the very tail end of really high fruit production time.
And we just kind of finished blackberries. Those are kind of, they came a little early this year. So
they did. Yep.
Okay. Gooseberries and wild currants. Carrie's been finding bushes, but almost no berries at all. Has this ever happened to you?
Yeah, actually it happened to me this year, not with currants and gooseberries, but with cherries, wild cherries. So we had, at least in my area, and maybe something similar happened where you are, we had a weird frost, and it was right when the cherry blossoms were out. And so the cherry trees did not set fruit. It's kind of like if you get in an orchard, they are worried about, or a vineyard, about a late season frost when the plants are blossoming. And so the cherries here did not get pollinated because of that frost. It destroyed the flowers. And so when I found the cherries that I found this week and harvested, it was tucked in at the back edge of a wooded area that the only thing I can think of is it did not get that frost. It just was protected in the small, it was only a few little trees. It just happened to be protected from that frost. So that could be something that happened. And so it just did not get pollinated this year. Or it blossomed before the main pollinator that it wants was out. So the timing just for pollination could have been off.
All right, we got 2 more questions. We're sitting right about 8:26, so I want to be
Awesome.
cognizant of everyone's time and everything. And
yeah, sorry,
again,
I don't have any good lighting for you, but we can
it's all good. We can hear you loud and clear. So I do want to mention that, you know, Chelsea is so happy, willing, and able to respond to emails, texts, that type of stuff. So really take her up on the ability to help you grow and learn. So it's not a just canned statement. She's honestly looking to help. So take her up on it, because I can't tell you how many times I or fellow bow ladies have sent her stuff because we're like, this looks like this, but are we even in the right ballpark? So take her up on that. But
please do. I honestly, so my kids here in the county call me Miss Chelsea, and I love them. Miss Chelsea, what is this? I get it from people here. I get it from my bow people. I get it from anybody I've encountered that with any capacity of wild edibles programming that I've done. And it truly is exciting to know that you're, number one, that you're out and about, that you're curious, that you are, you know, working on your identification skills, and that it lets me know what people are out and about finding. And it keeps my identification skills sharp. And so if there is something that I'm like, I don't know what that is, I will tell you, and I will dig through my resources and do my best to try to help you, or at least send you down the right path so you can learn it on your own. Because if I just tell you what something is, like I did in this presentation, I don't generally try to just give you a name. I try to show you some characteristics first, because just telling you a name doesn't work. I forget people's names all the time, but if I can remember something about them, some feature, that helps me remember. So yeah, I will do my best to help answer your questions and cheer you on and encourage you and get you some success in learning your own identification skills.
All right, my last 2 questions that I got for you. Therese wants to know, how do you know when a mushroom is too far gone to eat?
When other critters want to eat it. So bugs and slugs will start infesting. There will be larvae in there. There will be holes from insects and beetles tunneling in. There will be chew marks on it, and if not that, it will be it won't look pleasant anymore. It'll start to be kind of slimy and mushy or grainy, or yeah, it just, you'll know it if it's just not something that looks like something you want to eat anymore.
All right, and then I guess I got 2 for you still, sorry. Doug wants to know, how do you store wild mushrooms? Suggestions on that?
Yeah. So I use the baskets in the field because mushrooms need to breathe. If you stuff them in a plastic container, or especially in a plastic bag, they will become mush very, very quickly, and they will deteriorate. And you want to bring good food back from your harvest, from the woods or from the park or wherever you're at. So let mushrooms breathe. If you're gonna have to store them, in a paper bag in the refrigerator is a good way. Don't leave them in any kind of liquid, because again, they're just going to break down and turn to mush and not be very pleasant anymore, become waterlogged. So any way that mushroom can breathe, especially in a basket, in a paper bag in the refrigerator. Plus, if you do the paper bag thing, it's a really easy way to keep your collection separate. So you're not intermixing different things. And after that, I try to cook them up right away and either eat them fresh, or if I'm not exactly sure what I want to use them for yet, like last night I had some chicken of the woods that I processed. So I trimmed it up and kind of brushed it off, and I just tossed it in olive oil, salt and pepper, and I threw it on the baking tray and cooked it, and then I threw it in a freezer bag, a vacuum seal freezer bag. So that way down the road, when I decide how I want to use that chicken of the woods, it's a pretty blank canvas to start with, but it's been cooked, so it won't have those enzymes that break it down. So if you've ever tried, that's why you like, if you're freezing green beans, let's say, you have to blanch it because it stops that enzymatic activity that would, when you thawed it, would just turn them to mush. So those are some, or I dehydrate them right away. So those are some ways to store / preserve your mushrooms for quick use, or if you have to hold them for a day or two.
Awesome. Okay, my last question, I think, and
Okay.
we're a little over, so I appreciate everyone sticking with us. But Alan wants to know about acorns. If you can touch on which acorns are edible.
So acorns are perfectly edible with the correct processing. So oak trees are separated into 2 different groups, the white oak group and the red oak group. And they have different properties as far as storage, how long they keep, just dried. Sam Thayer has an excellent chapter on acorns in his books. And so basically, to make acorns edible, you have to remove the tannins. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. You can do it through cold process or hot process. And in both instances, it is breaking down the actual, harvesting the nut meat out of the shell. So cracking into it, and then getting as much surface area as you can. So grinding it up, and then running it through a lot of cold water or boiling it through several changes of water to reduce and remove the tannins. And then you dry it, and you can grind it into a flour, or you can put them into like a bread when they're still soggy, those types of things. So there's some processing, but both red oak and white oak groups are edible and have their own own characteristics, depending on what you're looking for from them.
Well, I'm looking through the chat. I think we've hit everyone's questions. So I'm gonna thank everyone again for joining us, for sticking on a little bit longer today. We had a great evening with you, Chelsea. Thanks for bearing the pitch black there for us to get all our questions answered.
Yeah, and I don't know, Rachel, if there's a way for me to see the chat and the recordings and stuff. So I will snoop back through and try to hey Doug, yeah, thanks. I will try to look through there, and I like to see what you guys are. I don't get to see the chat, so I like to know what you guys are talking about, and if you have any other questions and things. I know, Rachel, you do an awesome job of trying to field all those for me. So yeah, thank you. I will be safe, yes. So it's more, I gotta try to figure out how I'm gonna find all my stuff to throw back in the car. So yeah, keep in contact with me. I'm here for you.
So just a couple more shout outs. So as Chelsea mentioned, I'll be sending an email to everyone with this recording. And yes, Chelsea, I'll get you the chat so you can see what was going on while you were in the dark. A couple other things. If you're new to getting into the outdoors, I am on a podcast, so thank you to whoever asked. The She Goes Outdoors podcast, we've had Chelsea on a couple times. I'm actually gonna be hitting her up to join us again to talk about fall fungi and berries. But so yes, I am on that podcast, and so this is the face to that voice. So as they say, a face for radio, right? But check us out, check out the podcast. We'd love to have you on. It's really about women talking to other women about being in the outdoors and getting involved. And so if you have things that you want to learn about, let us know so we can get professionals on there, novices, whoever we can find to really talk about those topics. Join us in the Iowa Becoming an Outdoors Woman Facebook group. The more people on there to talk. And yes, gentlemen that are on, you're welcome. It is female focused, but we allow and include anyone that's really just interested in getting outdoors and learning in a very open and safe environment. So that's out there. Registration for our May weekend will be coming up in January. So please look for that. Again, that all can be found on iowadnr.gov/BOW. And if you're looking to get out in person and really get hands-on experience, Chelsea's got an event coming up this weekend. So get registered. I'll drop that Facebook event in so you can get signed up, because I know we're looking for some more people to get involved in that. So if you're up in Northeast Iowa, North Central Iowa, depending on how you look at the map, go hang out with Chelsea this weekend. So again, appreciate it. The podcast is She Goes Outdoors. And we look forward to chatting with y'all later and hope you have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Rachel.
Take care, everyone.